You know, this is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
Welcome on in to your Sunrise Book Club. Today, we're starting a brand new journey. A journey with someone I talk about all the time on Monsters After Midnight, Sunrise Book Club, Midnight Book Club, and that is the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Jacques Vallée. The dude who helped Steven Spielberg make Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The man who worked with Dr. Hynek on Project Blue Book. He's been behind the scenes and in front of the scenes on UFO research for years. He's the granddaddy, big papa of weird. And this morning, we are starting Dimensions, a casebook for alien contact by Dr. Jacques Vallée. Over 1 million copy best-selling author. The acclaimed UFO Authority reveals startling new facts about the Earth's history, alien visitors, and how their acts have been repeatedly, I think that says misinterpreted. Without further ado, let's get into the introduction and part of chapter 1 today. I'm going to read for about an hour or so, so sit back, relax, and I'll try not to take too many detours, but no promises. We start with the introduction. Closed minds, open questions. A mystery has lingered in human imagination for many years. The mystery of unidentified flying objects and their occupants is coming back to the front pages of our newspapers with a parade of new claims. Not only are these objects seen in the sky and on the ground, but they are said to have contacted humans and in some cases abducted them. A mystery that has lingered in human imagination for many years, the mystery of unidentified flying objects and their occupants is coming back to the front pages of our newspapers with a parade of claims. Not only are these objects seen in the sky and on the ground, but they are said to have contacted humans and in some cases abducted them. The public has reacted to these stories with a mixture of skepticism, awe, and fear. The lack of reliable data and absence of serious research are intensifying this concern. Therefore, the time has come to re-examine the UFO phenomena and to reopen the archives that deal with the ancient dream of our civilization, of every civilization, contact with alien beings. Each culture has contributed something to the great pool of legends, folklore, and traditions that link human imagination with the heavens. Today, the rapid pace of technology precipitates a new awareness of the importance of the problem. The modern reader needs a new perspective, a new paradigm in which fear can be set aside and knowledge can prevail. Above all, he needs more facts. That's what this book's for. More facts, Max. In an effort to help answer this need, the present book represents the distillation of some 25 years of research. It gathers and updates some previously published material into a new, more manageable collection of the most significant events that have marked the rich history of the UFO phenomena. And it leads to a new conclusion. Although I am among those who believe that UFOs are real physical objects, I do not think that they are extraterrestrial in the ordinary sense of the term. In my view, they present an exciting challenge to our concept of reality itself. And that's what I'm all about. They slide from dimensions, not just, they're not just like some goofs from space flying their mechanical machines. In its June 1987 issue, the popular astronomy magazine Sky and Telescope noted with sneering fashionable skepticism that unidentified flying objects have faded from popularity in recent years. Perhaps as the news media become more aware of how little is behind every UFO tale that has ever been well investigated. Well, that's not true. Ironically, during the same month, 2 books climbed the popularity charts to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. Communion by Whitley Strieber, another cornerstone classic, and it really gets me excited to read this book because this is written after Communion. We have Communion too. It's one man's firsthand account of a terrifying encounter that turned into a beautiful encounter with strange entities from beyond. And Intruders I gotta pick up still, contain sensational first-person accounts of encounters with UFOs and confrontations of spiritual contact with their alleged occupants. Ironically, during the same month, 2 books climbed the popularity charts to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. Communion by old Whitley Strieber, we love that guy, and Intruders. They both contain sensational first-person accounts of encounters with UFOs and confrontations or spiritual contact with their alleged occupants. This coincidence between scientific arrogance and a new social trend illustrates an important fact in our society. While science consistently refuses to consider phenomena that lie outside the safe regions of its current understanding, the public is eagerly reaching for explanations that fit its experience. While our scientists remain unaware of important data that could stimulate new theories of the universe, the rest of us miss an opportunity to make serious progress in what should be an important spiritual quest. This book is an attempt to close the gap by examining evidence for the existence of UFOs, not only in our time, but in our earlier ages as well. Such a historical perspective, which is summarized in part 1, quote-unquote, the Alien Chronicles, is entertaining and often captivating. But more importantly, it is critical to a full understanding of the problem. If these objects have been seen from time immemorial, as I will show, and if their occupants have always performed similar actions along similar lines of behavior, then it is not reasonable to assume that they are quote-unquote simply extraterrestrial visitors. They must be something else, something more. Perhaps they have always been here, on Earth, with us. In my view, the widespread belief among researchers of the field in the literal truth of the quote-unquote abductions is only a very crude approximation of a much more complex tapestry. Another reality is involved here. A reality characterized by cosmic seduction, strange signs in heaven, and paranormal events that present a rich tapestry of psychic phenomena. Part 2 is devoted to an analysis, paving the way for Part 3, which I called a challenge to research, for we can no longer avoid seriously studying the UFO phenomena. For a long time, the US military has dismissed the problem because it did not show any hostile intent and did not threaten national security. This argument is no longer tenable. And that quote right there, it did not show any hostile intent and did not threaten national security. We know from other books that we've read, like Out There by Bloom, that that's a lie. That's just what they tell the public. That's what they tell a curious scientist. Oh, we're not looking into that. When they do have, a crew or a program deep in the dark studying the very thing they tell us they're not studying. But God bless old Vallee. And yeah, I mean, he says this argument's no longer tenable. I think that's kind of a hint to us. At a time when our government is proposing to deploy the Strategic Defense Initiative, commonly known as quote-unquote Star Wars, in space, how long can we tolerate an unexplained phenomena in the upper atmosphere? UFOs, whatever they are, remain visible to the naked eye and detectable by reconnaissance satellites, electronic sensors, and radars. A future wave of unidentified objects similar to those that were recorded in 1952, 1954, 1966, or 1973 could trigger the SDI network and augment the risk of starting the next World War accidentally. It could even mask a real attack. This possibility is not acceptable in terms of our national security. Even if these objects are not hostile, it is equally unacceptable to any of the advanced nations. It can be argued that UFO phenomena are so complex and so far beyond our ability to classify them that no solution can be expected for a long time to come. This is a point well taken, but it should not discourage us from doing active research. Even if we never understand the whole phenomena, there still may be useful lessons to learn from its similar components. I would be very happy, for instance, to simply understand how these objects manipulate electromagnetic waves to create retraceable light beams with gravity effects capable of pulling objects, people, and animals through the air. Or understand how they paralyze witnesses who come close to them, and or how they phase through walls. That'd be cool to know too. Even though there's some people here on Earth who claim to be able to do that. Imagine a primitive bushman watching a Boeing 747 land. He has no chance from his single occurrence of understanding the intricate technology that controls the aircraft's powered flight. But a good look at the landing gear could well inspire someone to invent the wheel. Such is our position with respect to UFOs. Are they real? Why do they seem to violate the principles of our physics? And why are they interacting with us? While the minds of many scientists are closed to the unknown, a few of us believe that these questions are very much open. They provide one of the most exciting challenges ever presented to science, to our collective imagination, and to human reason. I do not have the answer to the mystery, but I do have a great deal of relevant data. Much progress has been made in the last several years. And in my own work, I have come to think of the UFO problem in terms of 3 distinct levels. Break it down, Jacques. The first level is physical. We now know that a UFO behaves like a region of space, of a small dimensions, about 10 meters, within which a very large amount of energy is stored. This energy is manifested by pulsed light phenomena of intense colors by other forms of electromagnetic radiation. The second level is biological. Reports show that all kinds of psychological effects on the witnesses. Exposure to the phenomenon causes visions, hallucinations, space and time disorientation, physiological reactions, including temporary blindness, paralysis, and sleep cycle changes, and long-term personality changes. The third level is social. Belief in the reality of UFOs is spreading rapidly at all levels of society throughout the world. Books on the subject continue to accumulate. Documentaries and major films are being made by men and women who grew up with flying saucer stories. Expectations about life in the universe have been revolutionized. Many modern themes in our culture can be traced back to the message from space, quote unquote, coming from UFO contactees in the 40s and 50s. Woo! George Van Tassel, down in the deserts. He's got the Integratron. Go check it out. The experience of close encounters with a UFO is a shattering physical and mental ordeal. The trauma has effects that go far beyond what the witnesses recall consciously. New types of behavior are conditioned. New types of beliefs are promoted. Aside from any scientific consideration, the social, political, and religious consequences of the experience are enormous if they are considered over the time span of a generation. Faced with the new wave of experiences of UFO contact that are described in books like Communion and Intruders, and in movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, our religions seem obsolete. Our idea of the church as a social entity working within rational structures is obviously challenged by the claim of direct communication in modern times with visible beings who seem endowed with supernatural powers. This idea can shake our society to the very roots of its culture. Witnesses are no longer afraid to come forward with personal stories of abduction, spiritual exchanges with aliens, or even physical interaction with them. Such reports are folklore in the making. I have discovered that they form a striking parallel to the tales of meetings with the elves and jinn of medieval times, with the Dinsians of Mangonia and the land beyond the clouds of ancient chronicles. But they are something else too, a sign of important things to come. My own private conjecture, which deviates considerably from the accepted dogma among UFO believers, is that we are dealing with yet an unrecognized level of consciousness. Yeah. Independent from man, but closely linked to the Earth, which has its own relationship with cosmic forces. And it's like what Itzhak Bentov talks about in Stalking the Wild Pendulum. It's an entity from another level of consciousness. Today, there are many reasons for expecting a change in attitudes towards alien intelligence. Our national scientific effort has temporarily run out of objectives that can capture the public's imagination and enthusiasm. The eager anticipation of encounters with other intelligent beings would help in transcending local conflicts on this earth and achieving within a single generation behavioral changes that might otherwise take hundreds of years to complete. If this is the contribution of the UFO phenomena, then we are in fact dealing with one of history's major transitions. Ooh! I mean, this was back in 87. Now we're getting to, we had this before the Tic Tac video was released, before all this other, the Vegas encounter, before a lot of stuff. Now it's time for part 1, the Alien Chronicles. Ooh. And we start with a quote. In the last analysis, magic, religion, and science are nothing but theories of thought, and science has supplanted its predecessors, so it may hereafter be itself superseded by some more perfect hypothesis, perhaps by some totally different way of looking at the phenomena, of registering the shadows on the screen, of which we in this generation can form no idea. Sir James Fraser, OM. From the Golden Bow. Let's dive in. Let us start with a simple fact. Man has always been aware that he is not alone. All the traditions of mankind carefully preserve accounts of contact with other forms of life and intelligence beyond the animal realm. Even more significantly, they claim that we are surrounded with spiritual entities that can manifest physically in ways that we do not understand. This chapter summarizes some of these traditions and draws a close parallel between the ancient accounts of the modern cases and contact with similar entities. I started work on this book during a business trip to Paris. A few hours of free time between 2 meetings gave me opportunity to pay visit to one of the most extraordinary artistic achievements of all time, the Sainte-Chapelle, which is located inside the Palace of Justice, a block away from Notre Dame. It is an incredible feeling, one which can only be compared to a trip within a jewel, or rather an entire treasure chest of jewels. There is almost nothing inside the chapel itself, a few sculptures, painted wood, but the walls are made of stained glass, and the various lights of Paris shine through to create a mood, a perception, which is totally alien to the rest of human experience. Ooh. One of the stained glass panels of the church shows the abduction of the prophet Ezekiel by an object that came as a whirlwind. He saw wheels within wheels and 4 strange creatures. He was carried away to a remote mountaintop where he found himself in a state of wonder and confusion. In my many years of UFO investigations, I have spoken to numerous witnesses, people I could hear and touch and look straight in the eye, who told me they had been caught in a whirlwind and had seen strange creatures and had been left wondering and confused. They looked to me to dispel their confusion. All I could tell them was to assure them that they were not alone, that many others shared the same experience, that I believed future science would eventually accept and understand it as an important source of new knowledge. Oh, let's hope. The people I interviewed would not someday be represented as stained glass figures in the chapels where kings and queens bend their knees and bow their heads in worship. They were ordinary people with all the hopes and weaknesses of human beings, but their stories, nonetheless, are worth listening to. Let's listen to some. My first meeting with the woman I'll call Helen took place after she called me to tell me about a particular motor she wanted to build. She told me she was bent on solving the energy crisis by building a new type of engine. During our interview, Helen confessed that the motor idea was triggered by an abduction aboard a UFO. It seems that she had seen the UFO with a group of musicians coming back from Lompoc, California to Los Angeles the summer of 1968, a summer of high strangeness indeed. I love Jacques because he's like us here. He wants to hear your story. because, as always, old Dr. Vallee and myself, if you have had a strange encounter with the unknown, you want to tell me about it, I would absolutely love to hear, because, as always,
we're ready to believe you.
You gosh darn right. We left after the last performance on that weekend, she told me. We probably packed the gear around 2:15 a.m. We must have been on the road for half an hour to 45 minutes. It might even been a whole hour. At that point, we were on a flat stretch of land. There were hills on the right-hand side, and we were going south. Out of these hills came a white light, and it moved up and began to come in our direction. An airplane couldn't have turned the way that did, so we figured it was a helicopter. Then it began to do very erratic things and twists, go very far out, come closer very quickly. I interrupted her to slow her down in her excited recollection. I wanted to get the step-by-step account of her perceptions. How did you react to all this? I asked. What did the others see? Her reply was forceful. All four of us were very aware of it, she said immediately. We talked a lot about it, but nobody said let's hide or anything like that. George and Barbara were up front. George was driving. I was in the back behind him, and Dave was to my right. Dave and Barbara were afraid of it. George and I were more encouraging the whole thing. We enjoyed this. All right, so they could have been watching a helicopter. What did the object do? It came up over the car, and then in front of us, maybe 100 to 200 feet above the ground. And it was, I would say, about 6 lanes of the freeway in width. It was white, and it showed a very beautiful kind of glow. I seemed to remember some kind of windows, but I really couldn't be sure. It didn't make any noise, and the thing was big. 4 white lights, funnel-shaped, extended from the perimeter of the vehicle and down around each of our bodies. She looked up and shuddered as if it were there, still hovering right above us. What kind of feeling did you have then? I remember leaving my body on the seat of the car and being about 3 or 4 feet out of the car, she said, in a matter-of-fact way. All 4 of us did the same thing. Off we went. At that point, I don't remember anything else. Until fairly recently, I didn't think there was anything else. And I began to realize that something might have happened, because the next thing I remember, I was coming back into the car. I looked around and I saw the light shimmer around Barbara and Dave, and we were slowly dissipated back into our bodies. I had trouble visualizing the scene. Astral travel is nothing new. That's how witches allegedly went to Sabbath, and saints to heavenly communion. An American businessman and psychic experimenter, Robert Monroe, has set up a learning centers complete with training tapes to help people leave their bodies. The psychedelic culture embraced the same concept enthusiastically in the 60s. Perhaps any living entity can transfer its consciousness outside of its own body. But automobiles have no consciousness and are not capable of astral travel. What happened to the car? I asked her. The vehicle stayed with us at that time and then began to move off a little bit in the distance, and the car was just going on its own velocity. That was the initial experience of it. At her request, I arranged for Helen to undergo a very mild form of hypnotic regression. During that session, she remembered going on board the quote-unquote saucer and observing its propulsion mechanism. She met a man dressed in white who showed her the amazing motor she is now determined to build. I began checking her story. First, I had a lengthy telephone conversation with George, who hasn't seen Helen in several years, but remembers the incident, a turning point in his life. Dave had moved to another city where I traced him. A friend of mine, a psychiatrist, got in touch with him and obtained his statement. Like George, he vividly recalls the whole incident and describes it in similar terms. Ever since the sighting, Helen has felt the urge to build the machine whose principle was revealed to her by one of the saucer pilots. It has become a central point for her, the goal of her entire life. Yet the motor she wants to build could never run physically, at least in the way she explains it. There are 4 witnesses to this UFO event, and everything seems to point to the reality of their experience. But this is precisely the place where many questions are raised in my mind. Consider the story from the point of view of the quote-unquote spacecraft theory. Should we agree with most UFO believers that what Helen saw was a vehicle from another planet coming here for exploration? On the surface, this interpretation seems to fit the facts. But what about the paranormal effects? Can we ignore Helen's testimony about being quote-unquote teleported into the UFO? Can we ignore the absurdity that characterized the entire episode? How does it fit with the spacecraft idea? The quote-unquote meeting aboard the craft makes no sense. If we assume the man in white was a visitor from a distant star, why would such visitors look like us? Why would they show us a motor that does not have an objective physical function, a motor we cannot build? These are some of the questions to which we will return again and again in this book. Some abduction reports are even more extraordinary. In 1985, a woman named Kathy told researcher Bud Hopkins that she had found herself inside of an object in a place that was entirely white, with a small gray being who looked humanoid. Under hypnosis, Kathy recalled something like a medical examination. In his book Intruders, Hopkins proposed a scenario in which UFO occupants had timed their visit at the appropriate day of month when Kathy would be alone. Kathy had discovered she was pregnant in early 1978. She was then 19 years old. The date of her wedding, which had been planned for late spring, was moved up to April. Pregnancy was confirmed by her doctors, yet in March, she found herself no longer pregnant. She cried and found herself repeating, "They took my baby." Under hypnosis in 1985, according to Hopkins, Kathy recalled beings touching her, immobilizing her, and performing some sort of operation on her. In other accounts, abductees of both sexes have described having physical contact with aliens. Many researchers speculate that such accounts prove that intruders from space are experimenting with human genetics. But they fail to point out that these modern stories are consistent with perplexing accounts that come to us from earlier times, from the oldest records we have. It's like a repeated shared nightmare, a repeated shared dream. It's like hybridization, or something. It's interesting. The age of the gods. It is in the literature of religion that flying objects from celestial countries are most commonly described, along with the organization, nature, and philosophy of their occupants. Indeed, several writers have consistently pointed out that the fundamental texts of every religion refer to the contact of human community with a quote-unquote superior race, of beings from the sky. This terminology is used in particular in the Bible, where it said, "They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land." The visitors have the power to fly through the air using luminous craft, sometimes called celestial chariots. With these manifestations are associated impressive physical and meteorological displays, which the ancient authors call quote-unquote whirlwind or quote-unquote pillars of fire. The occupants of these, and etc., other names, the occupants of these craft, to whom popular imagery will later ascribe wings and luminosity, are similar to man and communicate with him. They are organized under a strict military system. The chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of angels. The Lord is among them. These traditions are not restricted to Egypt, Israel, or Mesopotamia. During the period of early history of Japan, ending at about 3000 BC, called the Jomon era, an important artistic activity was making earthen statues. At first, these statues were small and very simple. They were made to represent human beings. But in the middle period, the artists started to make larger statues showing standard figures of drastically different design. Large chests, arc-shaped legs, very short arms, and larger heads, apparently covered with complete helmets. These statues seem to depict precisely the same quote-unquote occupants, similar to those seen aboard UFOs by modern witnesses. On the nature of the helmets, archaeologists disagree. In 1924, because he thought that its expression looked like that found on a wooden mask made in Africa, Dr. Jinto Hasby proposed that the headgear was in reality a mourning mask used in burials. In the Toku area of northern Japan, however, some of the most elaborate statues of this kind show something like a pair of sunglasses, huge eyes with insect-like horizontal slit, a truly remarkable design. Supposedly, the statues of the later part of the Jomon era were first made with earth, then copied on rock or soft stone. Those found in the Nambu province are carved in rock and show helmets. One of them, a Jomon Dogu, dated to 4300 BC and excavated on the Amadaki ruins in the Awate prefecture, shows details of the front part of the helmet with a round opening at the base of the nose, below what appears to be a large perforated plate. The resemblance of the Dogu statues with many descriptions of occupants is a relevant factor here. It has led some students of the Jomon era to speculate that the statues might indicate the distant memory of visitors from elsewhere. The headgear with its filter, the large goggles, the necks with wide collars, and the one-piece suits are certainly intriguing. Sorcerers from the clouds? It is a common belief that the term flying saucer was quote-unquote made in America. Was it not coined by an American businessman in 1947? Was not the first official investigation of the mystery by military authorities in the United States a few weeks later? Well, yes, but a farmer from Texas described a dark flying object with quote-unquote large saucer as early as January 1878. And ancient Japanese records inform us that on October 27, 1180, an unusual luminous object described as an earthenware vessel flew from the mountain in the Ki province beyond the northeast mountain of Fukuhara at midnight. After a while, the object changed its course and was lost to sight at the southern horizon, leaving a luminous trail. In view of the time in which has elapsed since the sighting, as U.S. Air Force investigators like to say, it would be difficult to obtain additional data today. It is interesting, however, to find a medieval Japanese chronicler speaking of flying earthenware. The Japanese must also receive credit for having organized the first official investigation. The story is so amusing and parallels so well with the modern-day activities of the U.S. Air Force that I cannot resist reproducing it here. Ooh, please do. The date was September 24th, 1235. 7 centuries before our time, General Yoritsume was camping with his army. Suddenly, a curious phenomenon was observed. Mysterious sources of light were seen to swing in a circle in the southwest, moving in loops until the early morning. General Yoritsume ordered what he would now term a quote-unquote full-scale scientific investigation and sent his consultants to work. Soon they made their report. The whole thing was completely natural, General, they said in substance. It is only the wind making the stars sway. My source of information for this report, Yasuke J. Matsumura of Yokohama, adds sadly, scholars on government pay are always making ambiguous statements like that. Celestial phenomena seems to have been so commonplace in the Japanese skies during the Middle Ages that they directly influence human events. Panic, riots, and disruptive social movements were often linked to celestial apparitions. The Japanese peasants had the disagreeable tendency to interrupt any quote-unquote, to interpret any signs from heaven as strong indications that their revolts and demands against the feudal system or against the foreign invaders were just, and as an assurance that their rebellions would be crowned with success. Numerous examples of such situations can be quoted. For instance, on September 12, 1271, the famous priest Nichiren was about to be beheaded at Tatsun no Kuchi, Kamakura, when there appeared in the sky an object like a full moon, shiny and bright. The officials panicked and the execution was not carried out. On August 3rd, 989, during a period of great social unrest, 3 round objects of unusual brilliance were observed. Later, they joined together. In 1361, a flying object described as being shaped like a drum, about 20 feet in diameter, emerged from the inland sea off western Japan. On January 2nd, 1458, bright objects resembling a full moon were seen in the sky, and this apparition was followed by quote-unquote curious signs in heaven and on earth. People were quote-unquote amazed 2 months later. On March 17th, 1458, 5 stars appeared circling the moon. They changed color 3 times and vanished suddenly. The rulers were distressed and believed that the sign announced a great disturbance throughout the land. All the people in Kyoto were expecting disasters to follow, and the emperor himself was very upset. 10 years later, on March 8th, 1468, a dark object which made a, quote, sound like a wheel flew from Mount Kasuga toward the west at midnight. The combination of the sound and the darkness of the flying object is difficult to explain in natural terms. On January 3rd, 1569, on January 3rd, 1569, in the evening, a flaming star appeared in the sky. It is regarded as an omen of serious changes, announcing the fall of the Chu dynasty. Some phenomena continued during the 16th and 18th centuries. For instance, in May 1606, fireballs were continuously reported over Kyoto, and one night a whirling ball of fire resembling a red wheel hovered near Nijo Castle and was observed by many samurai. The next morning, the city was filled with rumors, and people again muttered, "This must be portent." Beginning one noon in September 1702, the sun took on a bloody color for several days in succession, and cotton-like threads fell down, apparently falling from the sun itself. The phenomena reminiscent of the 1917 quote-unquote miraculous observations in Fatima, Portugal. Chaos spread all over Japan, and on January 2nd, 1749, when 3 round objects like quote-unquote a moon appeared and were seen for 4 days. Such a state of social unrest developed and seemed so clearly linked with the mysterious celestial objects that the government decided to act. Riot participants were executed, but confusion became total when people observed 3 moons aligned in the sky and several days later 2 suns. Undoubtedly, the Japanese may have experienced some natural phenomena similar to mirages and incorrectly interpreted in the context of social rebellion. From this distance, however, it is impossible to separate reliable observations from emotional interpretation. What matters here is the link between certain unusual phenomena observed or imagined and the witness's behavior. These accounts show that it is possible to affect the lives of many people by showing them displays that are beyond their comprehension. A brief examination of legendary events in Western Europe in the Middle Ages will show that similar rumors about strange flying objects and supernatural manifestations was spreading there. Indeed, Pierre Bossuet in the 16th century remarked, "The face of heaven has been so often disfigured by bearded, hairy comets, torches, flames, columns, spears, shields, dragons, duplicate moons, suns, and other similar things, that if one wanted to tell it in an orderly fashion, those that have happened since the birth of Jesus Christ only, and inquire about the causes of their origin, the lifetime of a single man would not be enough." So in ancient times, the guy basically saying so much weird shit you can't even say it in a lifetime. According to the later edition of the same book, this is what happened a few miles off of Trebungen, Germany on December 5th, 1577 at 7 a.m. About the sun, many dark clouds appeared, such as we are wont to see during great storms, and soon afterwards have come from the sun and other clouds, all fiery and bloody, and others yellow as saffron. Out of these clouds have come forth reverberations resembling large, tall, wide hats, and the earth showed itself yellow and bloody, and seemed to be covered with hats, tall and wide, which appeared in various colors such as red, blue, and green, but most of them black. Especially interesting to us will be the fact that these reports of celestial objects are linked with claims of contact with strange creatures, a situation parallel to modern-day UFO landings. Since these rumors have been puzzling to many authorities on the Roman Catholic Church, perhaps it is appropriate to begin with the quotation from the life of Saint Anthony, the Egyptian-born founder of the Christian monasticism, who lived in 30 AD in the desert. Saint Anthony met with a strange being of small stature who fled after a brief conversation with him. Before long, and this is the quote, the Anthony encountering the small little creature. Before long, a small rocky valley shut in on all sides. He sees a mannequin with a hooded snout, horned forehead, and the extremities of a goat's feet. When he saw this, Anthony, like a good soldier, seized the shield of faith and the helmet of hope. The creature nonetheless began to offer him the fruit of the palm tree to support him on his journey, and, as it were, pledges of peace. Anthony, perceiving this, stopped and asked who he was. The answer he received from him was this: "I am a mortal being and one of the inhabitants of the desert." Whom the Gentiles deluded by various forms of error worship under the names of fauns, satyrs, and incubi. I am sent to represent my tribe. We pray you in our behalf to entreat the favor of your Lord and ours, who we have learnt came to us to save the world, and whose sound has gone forth into all the earth. As he uttered such words as these, the aged traveler's cheeks streamed with tears, the marks of his deep feeling, which he shed in the fullness of his joy. And marveling all the while that he could, understanding the satyr's language, and striking the ground with his staff, he said, "Woe to thee, Alexandria," he exclaimed. "Be speak of Christ, and you, instead of God, worship monsters?" He had not finished speaking when, as if on wings, the wild creature fled away. Let no one scruple to believe this incident. Its truth is supported by what took place when Constantine was on the throne, a matter of which a whole world was witness. For a man of that kind was brought alive to Alexandria and shown as a wonderful sight to the people. Afterwards, his lifeless body, to prevent its decay through the summer heat, was preserved in salt and brought to Antioch, that the emperor might see it. That little guy's still around? Again, with this story, we are faced with an account of truthfulness, of which it would be futile to question. The lives of the early saints are full of miracles that should be taken as literary figures rather than as scientific observations. The important point is that basic religious texts contain such material, giving, so to speak, letters of nobility to a category of beings widely believed to be supernatural in origin. Such observations as St. Anthony's prove fundamental when religious authorities are faced with the problem of evaluating medieval observations of beings from the sky. Claims of evocation of demons by occult means and modern miracles. The details and terminology of observations are not important to us. It is enough to note that the strange being is indifferently termed as a satyr or a mannequin, while the saint in himself states that Gentiles also use the names of faun and incubus. St. Jerome speaks of quote-unquote man of that kind. Throughout our study of these legends, we shall find some confusion in the above account, however. Throughout the study of these legends, we shall find some confusion. In the above account, however, it is at least clear to St. Anthony that the creature is neither an angel nor a demon. It had been, he would have recognized it immediately. In the 20th century old Indian book of primitive astronomy, Surya Siddhanta, it said that below the moon and above the clouds revolved the siddhas, perfected men, and the vidyaharas, possessors of knowledge. According to the Australian writer Andrew Thomas, Indian tradition holds that the siddhas could become very heavy at will, or as light as a feather, and travel through space and disappear from sight. Observations of beings who flew across the sky and landed are also found in the writings of Agobard, Archbishop of Lyons, France. Agobard, who was born in Spain 1779 and came to France, was 3 years old. Came to France when he was 3 years old, became archbishop at 37. When he died in 840, one of the most celebrated and learned prelates of the 9th century, he left an interesting account of a peculiarly significant incident. We have seen and heard many men plunge in such great stupidity, sunk in such depths of folly, as to believe that there is a certain region in which they call Magonia, whence ships sail into the clouds in order to carry back to that region those fruits of the earth which are destroyed by hail and tempests. The sailors paying rewards to the storm wizards, and themselves receiving corn and other produce. Out of the number of those whose blind folly was deep enough to allow them to believe these things possible, I saw several exhibitions of certain concourse of people. 4 persons in bonds, 3 men and women who said they had fallen from the same ships. After keeping them for some days in captivity, they had brought them before an assembled multitude, and as we have said in our presence, to be stoned, but truth prevailed. We will see that the occultists give a little different interpretation to that very same incident. The 7 visitors of Thasius Cardan. Throughout medieval times, a major current of thought distinct from official religion existed, culminating in the works of alchemists and hermetists. Among such groups were some of the early scientists and men remarkable for the strength in their independent thinking and for their adventurous lives, such as Paracelsus. The nature of the mysterious beings dressed in shiny garments or covered with dark hair intrigued these men intensely. They were the first to relate these strange beings to the creatures described in the Bible and in the writings of early Kabbalists. According to the biblical writers, the heavenly hierarchy includes beings of human form called cherubim, a name that in Hebrew means full of knowledge. Ezekiel describes them in the following terms: their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and their appearance like the appearance of lamps. It went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. Are the mysterious creatures who fly through the sky and land their quote-unquote cloud ships, Agobard's authority notwithstanding, of the same race as the angels? Asked the old philosophers. No, because they are mortal. A book entitled Entretiens sur les Sciences Secrets notes. Oh, that sounds like a dope-ass book. The Hebrews used to call these beings who are between angels and man, Sadaim. The Greeks, transposing the letters and adding but one syllable, called them daimonos. Among the ancient philosophers, these demons were held to be an aerial race, ruling over the elements, mortal, engineering, and unknown in this century to those who rarely seek truth in her ancient dwelling place, which is to say, the Kabbalah and the theology of the Hebrews, who possessed the special art of holding communion with the aerial people, and of conversing with all the inhabitants of the air. Plutarch even had a complete theory on the nature of these beings, according to A.H. Clow. Here's that theory. He thinks it is absurd that there should be no mean between the two extremes of immortal and mortal being, that there cannot be in nature so vast a flaw, without some intermedial kind of life, partaking of them both. As therefore we find the intercourse between the soul and the body to be made by the animal spirits, so between divinity and humanity there is a species of demons. It is not surprising then to find that quote-unquote philosophers disagreed with Agobard on the nature of the 3 men and women who were captured by the mob in Lyons. The famous Kabbalist Zedechechius, in the reign of Pepin, took it into his head to convince the world that the elements are inhabited by those people whose nature I have just described to you. The expedient of which he bethought himself was to advise the sylphs to show themselves in the air and everybody. Sylphs, that's another name for aliens, or, sky people. They did so sumptuously. These beings were seen in the air in human form, and sometimes in a battle array, marching in good order, halting under arms or encamped beneath magnificent tents, sometimes or wonderfully constructed aerial ships whose flying squadrons roved at the will of the zephyrs. What happened? Do you suppose that an ignorant age would so much as reason as to the nature of these marvelous spectacles? The people straightway believed that sorcerers had taken possession of the air for the purposes of raising tempests and bringing hail upon the crops. The learned theologians and jurists were soon of the same opinion as the masses. The emperor believed it as well, and this ridiculous chimera went so far that the wise Charlemagne, and after him Louis the Debonair, imposed grievous penalties upon all these supposed tyrants of the skies. The most extraordinary of these medieval cases involved the abduction of 4 people and their return to Earth. Oh my God. Hold on, let me do that again. That was almost round 2. Almost spilled my coffee round 2. Holy crap. Well, I guess I gotta pour some more. Okay. One day, among other instances, it chanced that 3 men and a woman were seen descending from these aerial ships coming down from a UFO. The entire city gathered about them, crying out that they were magicians and they were sent by Grimaldus, Duke of Brabantinium, of Charlemagne's enemy, to destroy the French harvest. In vain the 4 innocents sought to vindicate themselves by saying that they were their own country folk, and they had been carried away in a short time since the miraculous men who had shown them the unheard of marvels, and then desired to give them an account of what they had seen. The frenzied populace paid no heed to their defense, and were on the point of casting them into the fire, when the worthy Agobard, Bishop of Lyons, having been a monk in that city, had acquired considerable authority there, came running at the noise. And having heard the accusations of the people and the defense of the accused, gravely pronounced that both and the other were false, that it is not true that these men had fallen from the sky, and that what was said they had seen was impossible. The people believed what their good father Agobard said, rather than their own eyes, and were pacified, set at liberty the 4 ambassadors of the sylphs, and received the wonder of the book which Agobard wrote to confirm the judgment which he had pronounced. Thus the testimony of these 4 witnesses was rendered vain. Such stories were so well established during the Middle Ages that the problem of communicating with the elementals became a major preoccupation with Hermetic adepts, and an important part of their philosophy. Paracelsus wrote an entire book on the nature of these beings. He took great pains to warn the reader of the dangers of associating with them. I do not want to say here, because of the ills which might befall those who would try it, through which compact one associates with these beings, thanks to which compact they appear and speak to us. And in his treatise entitled Why These Beings Appear to Us, he presented the following ingenious theory. Everything God creates manifests itself to man sooner or later. Sometimes the universe confronts him with the devil and the spirits in order to convince him of their existence. From the top of heaven, he also sends angels, his servants. Thus, these beings appear to us not in order to stay among us or become allied with us, but in order for us to become able to understand them. These apparitions are scarce, to tell the truth. But why should it be otherwise? Is it not enough for one of us to see an angel in order for all of us to believe in the order of angels? I mean, I'm with you, Paracelsus. Paracelsus was probably born in 1493. And only 2 years earlier, Phasaeus Cardan had recorded his observation of 7 strange visitors directly related to the creatures of the elements who would be so puzzling to the great philosopher. The incident is preserved in the writings of his son, Jerome Cardon, 1501 to 1576, who is well known to us today as a mathematician. Jerome Cardon lived in Milan and was not only a mathematician, but also an occultist and a physician. In his book, De Subtilite, Cardon explains that he had often heard his father tell a particular story and finally searched for his record of the event, which reads as follows. Return of the humanoids, bleep, bleep, blorp. All right, cool. We're rounding the bases. Whoop. What time is it? I got to get to work. Okay. We're good. August 13th, 1491. When I completed the customary rites at about the 20th hour of the day, 7 men duly appeared to me, clothed in silken garments resembling Greek togas, and wearing, as it were, shining shoes. The undergarments beneath them were glistening, and ruddy breastplates seemed to be wrought of crimson, and were extraordinary glory and beauty. Nevertheless, all were not dressed in this fashion, but only 2 who seemed to be of the nobler rank than the others. The taller of them, who was of ruddy complexion, was attended to by companions of the second, who was a fairer and shorter stature of the 3. Thus, in all there were 7. He left no record as to whether their heads were covered. They were about 40 years of age, but they did not appear to be above 30. When asked who they were, they said that they were men. That they were men composed, as it were, of air, the subject to birth and death. It was true, much like Anthony's sighting, it was true that their lives were much longer than ours, and might even reach 300 years of duration. Question on the immortality of our soul, they affirm that nothing survives which is peculiar to the individual. When my father asked them why they did not reveal the treasures to men if they knew where they were, they answered that it was forbidden by a peculiar law, under the heaviest penalties, that anyone to communicate this knowledge to men. They remained with my father for over 3 hours, but when he questioned them as to the cause of the universe, they were not agreed. The tallest of them denied that God had made the world from eternity. On the contrary, the other added that God created it from moment to moment, so that should he desire for an instant, the world would perish. Be this fact or fable, so it stands. Nearly 3 centuries later, in September 1768, a young man of 16 was traveling to the University of Leipzig with 2 passengers from Frankfurt. It rained most of the journey, and the coach sometimes had trouble moving uphill. On one occasion, when the passengers left their seats to walk behind the horses, the young man noticed a strange luminous object at the ground level. All at once, in a ravine on the right-hand side of the way, I saw a sort of amphitheater, wonderfully illuminated. In a funnel-shaped space, there were innumerable little lights gleaming, ranged step-fashioned all over one another. They shone brilliantly, and the eye was dazzled. But what still more confused the sight was that they did not keep still, but they jumped about here and there, as well as downwards and above and up and vice versa, in every direction. The greater part of them, however, remained stationary and beamed on. It was only with the greatest reluctance that I suffered myself to be called away from the spectacle, which I could have wished to examine more closely. Now, whether this was a pandemonium of the will-o'-wisps or a company of luminous creatures, I will not decide. So if I was hallucinating, was it real? I don't give a shit. It happened. The young man in question was Goethe. You will find this sighting in his 6th book of his autobiography. According to the movie director and occult scholar Kenneth Anger, to whom I am indebted for this very interesting discovery, would the German poet and scientist have had occasion to learn more about these luminous creatures had he lived in the 20th century? If Paracelsus came back, would he find new material for his theories on the nature of the strange fugitive races beings from the sky? We can safely assume that their attention would be immediately attracted to the modern files of UFO landings and abduction reports. So let's dive into a little bit of that with Return of the Humanoids. One night on January 1958, a woman whose name I will not I was not authorized to publish, was driving along New York State Thruway in the vicinity of Niagara Falls in the midst of a violent snowstorm. The exact time was 1:30 a.m. She was going to visit her son, then in the army, and she was driving very carefully, trying to find an exit, for she believed the throughway was closed. She believed the throughway was closed ahead of her. Visibility was extremely bad. Hence, she had no chance to think when she suddenly saw what seemed to be an airplane wreck in the center parkway. A large shape was visible, and a slim rud at least 50 feet high was illuminated and getting shorter as though it were shrinking into the ground. My motor slowed down, and I came closer to my car and stopped completely. I became panicky and tried desperately to start it as I had no lights. My first thought was to get out and see what was happening. But suddenly I saw two shapes rising around the slim pole, which was still growing shorter. They were suspended but moving about it. They seemed to be like animals with 4 legs and a tail, but 2 front feelers under their head like arms. Then, before I could even grasp the things disappeared and the shape rose, and then I realized it was a saucer. It spun and zoomed about 10 feet off the ground and up into the air, and I could not even see where it went. My lights suddenly came on. I started the car, and it was all right. I pulled right up to that place, got out with a flashlight, and walked over to see where it had been sitting. A large hole was melted into the snow about a foot across, and the grass was showing on it. The grass was warm, but nothing was dug up around there. The woman, who met only with disbelief when she told her story to her family, reported the case in a letter to my correspondent Otto Binder when he syndicated the series Our Space Age. When his syndicated series Our Space Age began to appear in a number of newspapers. The most puzzling element in this account is not so much what is described, but the fact that stories have become, since 1946, rather common in all parts of the world. To a physicist, of course, they appear unbelievable, just as the strange mannequin met by St. Anthony would appear unbelievable to a biologist. And yet, there are several cases on record in which similar accounts are associated with traces that can hardly be questioned. In the celebrated incident in Sirocco, New Mexico, it was policeman Lonnie Zamora who reported seeing 2 small beings dressed in white close to a shiny egg-shaped object, which rested on four pads before it took off with a thunderous noise, only to become perfectly silent as it flew away. The incident took place on April 24th, 1964, and was the occasion for some interesting measurements by local police officials and by Federal Bureau of Investigation men of the traces left by the object. Here again, we observe an emotional pattern strangely reminiscent of the medieval scene just surveyed. The witness in the Socorro case, when he was about to be interviewed by Air Force investigators, was so little convinced that he had observed a device of human construction that he asked to see a priest before releasing his report to the authorities. Another case, and this is a favorite, another case that's hard to discount is the report of the Kentucky family who claimed to have been besieged by several little men whose appearance was completely fantastic. The incident occurred one night on April 21st, 1955, and was the occasion of many strange observations of the behavior of the quote-unquote visitor. One of the creatures was seen approaching the farmhouse with both hands raised. When it was about 20 feet away, 2 of the witnesses shot at the intruder, and it did a flip and was lost in the darkness. When it appeared at the window, the man came back inside the house, and it was shot at. Again, the creature was seen on the roof, was knocked over by a bullet, but instead of falling, it just floated to the ground. The entities had oversized heads, almost perfectly round, and had very long arms, terminating in huge hands armed with talons. They wore a sort of glowing aluminum shirt, which is reminiscent of the sylphs of 1491. Their eyes were very large and apparently very sensitive. They always approached the house from the darkest corner. The eyes had no pupils or eyelids. They were much larger than the human eyes and set on the side of the head. The creatures generally walked upright, but when shot at, they would run on all fours with extreme rapidity. Their arms seemed to provide most of the propulsion. On September 10th, 1954, in Quarouble, a small French village near the Belgian border at about 10:30 p.m., Marius Delwild stepped outside and was once again intrigued by a dark mass on the railroad tracks. Delwild then heard footsteps. Turning on his light, he found himself facing two beings wearing very large helmets in what seemed to be diving suits. They had broad shoulders, but Delwild did not see their arms. They were less than 4 feet tall. Delwild moved towards them with the intention to intercepting them, but a light appeared on the side of the dark object of the tracks, and he found that he could not move. When he regained control of his body, the two visitors had entered the supposed machine and flown away. This classic observation had a strange sequel, never before published. Here you go, folks. French civilian investigators who studied the case were cooperating closely with local police officials, but there were other people on site, notably representatives of the air police from Paris. When an inquiry was made regarding some stones found calcinated or white hot at the spot where the saucer had been seen by Delwild, it was discovered that even the police could not obtain information as the results of their analysis. In the words of the local police chief, the official body working in liaison with the air police belongs to the Ministry of National Defense. The very name of this ministry exudes the idea of any communication. So basically, don't try and get any info. They're not going to tell you. On November 19, 1954, the police confirmed that Delwild had made a second report concerning an observation of an object in the vicinity of his home. However, police said, Delwild and his family have decided, for fear of adverse publicity, to take no one in their confidence regarding the second occurrence. Therefore, you will find no mention of it in the local newspaper. Furthermore, civilian investigators were told politely but in no uncertain terms that any further information on such instances would be kept confidential by the police. And also, it's the same like the Hopkinsonville family, the Kelly, Kentucky family we read about. They ended up moving because people were coming to their house to bother them. The Vegas family, they stopped talking to the media too after they had their encounter very recently. Reports, however, continued, and some of them would have delighted Paraclesis. On October 14, 1954, a miner named Servalsky claimed to have met on a country road near Irchin, also in the north of France, a strange being of small height and bulky figure, with large eyes and a fur-covered body. The little person, less than 4 feet tall, had a large head and wore a brown skull cap, which formed like a fillet a few inches above the eyes. The eyes protruded with a very small irises. The nose was flat, the lips were thick. A minor detail, the witness did not claim he had seen the creature emerge from a flying saucer or re-enter it. He just happened to meet the strange being, who did not wear any kind of respiratory device. Before he could think of stopping him, the creature disappeared. That's like a classic little cryptid guy encounter. 6 days later, on October 20th, 1954, Provici di Ebra, near Como, Italy, a man had just put his car in the garage when he saw a strange being covered in a luminous suit, about 4 feet tall, standing near a tree. When he saw the motorist, the creature aimed a beam of some sort, or a flashlight at him, paralyzing the witness until a motion he made when clenching his fist holding the garage keys seemed to free him. He rushed to attack the stranger, who rose from the ground and fled with a soft whirring sound. The author of this unbelievable story was 37 years old and was known locally as a trustworthy man. He arrived home in a state of great shock and went to bed with a high fever. The details of this case were obtained through an investigation by the Italian police. Ooh. Okay, we're around the bases. We got 2 pages left here, filled with some more encounters. I'm realizing I spilled coffee earlier. Got a hold from it. 11 years later, on July 1st, 1965, Maurice Massé, a French farmer who lived in Vassaux, arrived in his field at 6 a.m. and was getting ready to start his tractor when he heard an unusual noise. Stepping into the open, he saw that a machine had landed near in his lavender field. He thought it must be some sort of prototype and walked towards it, with a mind to tell the pilots in no uncertain words to go find another landing spot for their contraption. It was only when he was within 20 feet of the machine that he came in full view of the scene and realized his mistake. Uh-oh. The object was egg-shaped and had a round cockpit and was supported by 6 thin legs and a central pivot, like the Socorro one. It was not bigger than a car. In front, appearing to examine a plant, were the 2 pilots. They were dressed in one-piece gray-greenish suits. On the left side of their belts was a small container. The larger one was on the right side. They were less than 4 feet tall and had human eyes, but their heads were very large. They had particularly no mouth and only a very small opening without lips. They wore no respiratory device, no headgear, no gloves. They had small, normal hands, and when Massey came upon them, they seemed to become suddenly aware of his existence, and yet it was without any indication of fear or surprise that the pilots took a small tube from its container, pointed it at Massey, with the result that the witness found himself suddenly incapable of movement. Paralysis, baby. Classique. The 2 entities looked at Massey and appeared to be exchanging their impressions vocally in some sort of gargle. These sounds came from their throats, insisted the witness, but the mouths did not move. The eyes, in the meantime, conveyed human expressions. In private, Massey told me that he had not been frightened by their attitude and that it contained more friendly curiosity than hostility toward them. After some time, estimated by Massey, about 1 minute, the creatures went inside the craft. The door closed like the front part of a wooden file cabinet, and Massey could see them through the cockpit. They were facing him as the object took off in the opposite direction, first hovering a few feet from the ground, then rising with the takeoff speed of a jet plane. When it was about 60 yards away, it vanished. I closely questioned the witness on this last point, but Massey insisted that he could not say whether the object went away so fast that the eye could not follow it, or whether it actually disappeared. He made it quite clear, however, that one moment the thing was there, and the next moment it wasn't. Massey remained alone in his field, paralyzed. The word paralysis is not properly used in connection with incidents of this type. Massey said that he was conscious during the whole observation. His physiological functions, respiration, heartbeat, were not hampered, but he could not move. Then he became very frightened indeed. Alone in his field, unable to call for help, Massey thought he was going to die. It was only after about 20 minutes that he gradually regained voluntary control of his muscles and was able to go home. There is a sequel to his experience. For several weeks after the incident, Massey was overcome with drowsiness, and all his relatives, as well as the investigators, observed that he needed so much sleep that he found it difficult to stay awake for even 4 hours at a time. This is another little-known characteristic of close proximity cases. To Massey, who was used to working from sunup to sundown, this was a very impressive and disturbing consequence of his experience. Another result of the publicity the case attracted was the great damage to Massey's field, as crowds of tourists gathered to see traces left by the craft. Stop it! If someone has an encounter, let them have it. Don't go. No one wants you there. Don't go tramping around a field. It's like the people wandering around the sides of the roads up here, picking all our fucking flowers. Let the flowers grow. They're wildflowers. Go to a flower shop. Support some local florist. At this point, I should say that Massey is a man respected in the community, a former resistance fighter, a conscientious and successful farmer. He is regarded as absolutely trustworthy by the police authorities who investigated the case under the direction of Captain Vallee Dingue. Yet, this man tells us a story that does not simply appear fanciful. It is completely unbelievable. What is Massey's impression of the visitors? For some reason, he says he knows they meant no harm. They were not hostile to him, only indifferent. And as he stood facing them during that long minute, he suddenly was overcome with the certitude that they were good, a belief he is unable to rationalize because at no point did he understand their strange language. The story is fantastic, yet it reminds us of the account of Betty and Barney Hill and the account they gave under hypnosis of their alleged abduction in New Hampshire on their way back from a vacationing in Canada, September 1961. They had seen a strange light over the White Mountains. It came close to the road, and next they remember being in their car some 60 miles south, without any memory of the intervening time travel. Under hypnosis, they remembered a long sequence of events involving abduction, small beings, and a quote-unquote medieval examinations. The account included a description of an alien language, of entities whose expressions were almost human, of an overwhelming feeling of confidence, and of not the slightest indication that the incident was meaningful, and not a slightest indication that the incident had a meaningful purpose or followed an intelligent pattern. Of considerable interest to the psychologist is the fact that the entities are endowed with the same fugitiveness and behave with the same ignorance of logical or physical laws as the reflection of a dream. The monsters of our nightmares are unpredictable, the monsters of our nightmares, the unpredictable witches of our childhood. Yet, their craft do not leave deep indentations in the ground. According to observers who were fully awake and absolutely competent at the time of the sighting, these indentations have been photographed and measured in hundreds of cases. It's not just dreams. We have physical evidence that go along with a lot of these cases. What does it all mean? How can one reconcile these apparently contradictory facts? Some, in a laudable attempt, question the classical search patterns. Is it necessarily true, they ask, that we would detect meaningful patterns in the same sense of our own intelligence level if in the behavior of a superior race? Is it not much more likely that we should find their actions only random data and incoherent pictures, much as a dog would if confronted with a mathematician writing on a blackboard? If so, it is only after new concepts have emerged in our own consciousness that we could quote-unquote discover the meaning of their presence in our environment. And if a superior race does in fact generate what we are now observing as UFO phenomena, perhaps it is precisely with the purpose of changing the course of human destiny and by presenting us with evidence of our limitations in the technical as well as in the mental realm. Children of the unknown, if they are not real, should we see these rumors as a sign that something in the human imagination has changed, bringing into new light uncharted areas of our collective unconscious? They may only be children of our fancy and our interest toward them akin to our love for Batman and Cinderella, but they may be real. Modern science rules over a narrow universe, one particular variation on an infinite theme. In any case, it is important to understand what need these images fulfill, why this knowledge is both so exciting and so distressing to us. Such is the subject of this book. Mwah! And that was the introduction and chapter 1 of Dimensions, a casebook of Alien Contact. Now, if you enjoyed it, join me next week. We'll be reading chapter 2, where we'll learn all about space crackers and lights in the sky. We're going to continue our next chapter continues a modern dive into the UFO phenomena and connecting it with its ancient roots. So join me then. That's all I got for you. We'll be going live next week, and then it should be up on YouTube in about a week or whenever the hell I have time. But bye-bye. Thanks for joining me.